Laura Bush writes in her book, Spoken from the Heart, "The English language lacks the words to mourn an absence. For the loss of a parent, grandparent, spouse, child, or friend, we have all manner of words and phrases, some helpful, some not. Still, we're conditioned to say something, even if it's only, 'I'm sorry for your loss.' For an absence for someone who was never there at all, we are wordless to capture that particular emptiness. For those who deeply want children and are denied them, those missing babies hover like silent, ephemeral shadows over their lives. Who can describe the feel of a tiny hand that is never held?" For as long as I can remember, I've always wanted a large family, full of children close in age, healthy, loving life, and full of joy. My children would know that they were loved and cherished, and they would never worry for their safety and security. In the same way that I longed for a large family of my own, I harbored a yearning to protect at-risk children. Children who had been abandoned, hurt, and abused, because I knew that very reality growing up. My parents divorced, and my father eventually severed ties to me. It was my stepfather who came into our home and stole my security and safety away when he began molesting me from the age of 7 to the age of 11. At that point, his abuse turned from sexual to emotional, physical, and psychological, and it continued through my teen years. I only shared this part of my story to show you where my deep-seated need to protect, love, nurture, and celebrate children comes from, and how it became such a driving force in my life. Growing up, I knew my mother's love, and yet I also knew that she feared the reality and instability of raising me in a single-parent household, where she struggled to provide basics like maintain our rent, utilities, and put food on the table. By the age of 18, I had escaped. I was married, and I was eager to start my own family. I was ready to welcome children into my home and heart, and I'd show them the love and security every child should be allowed to feel. My husband and I had 2 children. The joy of being a new mother was both amazing and exhausting. While many of my friends were out living their best single lives or off to college, I had settled into my little house in the same small town, Wilmington, Illinois, and I busied myself raising the children as well as my bonus child, my brother-in-law, that came into our home when I was 19 and he was 9. That's a whole different story and not mine to tell today. It took 20 years to feel like I was complete, or like my family was complete. My son Logan is about to turn 28. My middle daughter Caitlin is 26. And my youngest, Hannah, is 6. There have been many in between. At times it feels like Hannah was the result of a 20-year pregnancy. In order to explain how my beautiful youngest daughter came into my life, I must first give a little context. Of course, I was not physically pregnant for 20 years. That's longer than an elephant. God bless those mamas, 18 months. I've been physically pregnant a total of 8 times. I have 2 living biological children. I couldn't understand then or adequately explain now the feeling that I had when looking around my table, constantly feeling like someone was missing, counting out the wrong number of dinner plates, and the sorrow that I felt knowing that I'd have to replace the ones not to be used. Please know, I don't regret any of my pregnancies or losses. In a funny way, I know those children were meant to be in my family too. My third born, my son Alexander, was my first loss. It was a soul-crushing heartbreak that I thought I would never heal from. I walked away from my faith for the better part of a decade. Don't get me wrong, I believed in God, but I was really angry. I felt hurt, I felt abandoned, and I felt alone. And I fell further and further away from God and my dream of a complete family each time I held a child and hello meant goodbye. As I strove to understand why this loss was all part of my life and all part of my walk, I also began to pursue God. And this began a redemption story of sorts. In my final loss with my son Gabriel in the summer of 2012, I knew without a doubt that that was the last child I was going to carry. Almost 18 years after my first loss, I knew I wouldn't be completing my family in that way, and I was at peace with that fact. I also knew without a doubt that I would have more children, and they'd come to me in many different ways. Biology wasn't everything. The most important fact was the love that I was filled with that had nowhere to go, and the children that needed to be loved. That led me toward foster care. I attended pride classes and fielded worried questions from well-meaning friends and family. What are you going to do if you have to give the child back? Or how can you handle the hurt and loss of losing another baby? Most of all, I responded with is my feeling that loss more important than a baby's need or a child's need to feel safe and heard and loved and above all wanted? Every single time I answered no. My adult self should be able to process and provide sacrificial love. So I pushed through and I jumped the hoops I needed in order to get licensed. Right before the first anniversary of Gabriel's due date in December of 2013, I received the call. That morning, a tiny, unassuming little girl was placed into my arms. As she stretched and yawned, I heard the whisper almost audibly, "Say hello to your daughter." As my heart said hello to my beautiful, precious, sleepy little girl for the very first time, we were told in the beginning that she would probably be a temporary placement, maybe just a couple weeks through the holidays. But the days and weeks gave way to months. And I began to realize that the whisper that I heard, that was God. And this little girl was his plan for me all along. Holding my daughter Hannah, I felt that God had completed my family as promised, and I couldn't imagine my life any other way. Hannah's the fulfillment of all that had been on my heart since I was a child. In the summer of 2015, at 18 months old, Hannah's adoption was finalized. Hannah has a deep faith. She has a contagious laugh, and she loves big. Some of her favorites are her big sissy Caitlin, sometimes me, and her friends. But most of all, her Lammy. She's an adventurer at heart and always ready to travel. Lammy, too. Every day, I thank God that her birth mother chose life. I thank him even and especially for the brokenness that brought us together. Now I look around my dinner table and I see empty chairs for different reasons, as her older siblings are out conquering their dreams as adults. As for Hanny and me, well, we've settled into life as a mommy-daughter duo, and we're ready to greet each day with a smile. Although, as a side note, kindergarten, so much different than it was 20 years ago.